Welcome to this Whole Life Action Hour. I'm thrilled to be with you right now for a very important conversation. Right now, in the United States, over 3/4 of soybean, corn, and cotton are genetically modified or genetically engineered. And despite labeling requirements in 64 countries around the world, most of the food made from these products in the United States does not require any meaningful labeling. And although major biotech companies like Monsanto-Bayer insist that GMOs are safe, the World Health Organization has suggested otherwise. They've labeled glyphosate, found in RoundUp Ready crops, a probable carcinogen. It's also known to be an antibiotic and an endocrine disruptor. Today, we're going to talk about why genetically engineered foods are a food safety priority. We're going to talk about how you can protect yourself and your family from hidden dangers, and about the latest developments in this critical area of food production and food safety for all of us. And we've got the right person to join us for this conversation, because we're here today with Jeffrey Smith. He is a world authority on the dangers of genetically engineered foods. He is the founder of the Institute for Responsible Technology. In 2017, Jeffrey was named Person of the Year by Masters of Health magazine for his more than 2 decades of work exposing the health risks of GMOs in 45 countries. His book, Seeds of Deception, is the world's best-selling book ever on GMOs. And his award-winning documentary, Secret Ingredients, made with Amy Hart, shares remarkable stories of people who have regained their health and their lives after choosing to avoid certain harmful ingredients in their food. So Jeffrey is also a dear friend, and Jeffrey, I'm so glad to welcome you here.
You know, Ocean, I love hearing your questions and your introduction, because there's like, of all the people that ever interview me, and there's been 1,000, there's like 2 people that really know with such, just beyond a shadow of doubt, they know their stuff about GMOs, and it's you and your dad. So it's like, I want the people to know who are watching you, that you really do your homework, and you are following what in this area. I know you're following my stuff because I listen to you, but in each of these areas, you are so precise. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. So let's start with a little bit of a basics for those who may not be, because I'm sure we've got a range of viewers right now who are different levels of awareness on this. So what's a GMO?
Genetically modified organisms. Now, it used to be that we would say you take genes from one species, like bacteria or viruses, and force it into the DNA of other species like soybeans or corn. But there's also gene editing, which is another form of genetic engineering, where you don't necessarily add genes from one species to another. You can change and delete and double genes or reorder them within the organism that you're looking at. Now, in both cases, whether you're transferring genetic material or just editing or moving them around, it's not so simple that you could say, aha, precision and done. You end up creating massive collateral damage in the DNA, hundreds, thousands, even 10,000 mutations and alterations within the genetic structure, not to mention what could be hundreds or more changes in what the genes produce, the proteins and the metabolites. So it's kind of a genetic roulette when you get involved in it, and yet the biotech industry claims that it is safe and predictable in spite of overwhelming evidence that it's dangerous.
So there's been kind of an effort to say that gene editing is somehow a lot more precise and perhaps more controlled and perhaps a smaller thing. It's sort of like you're taking a book and you're editing a little bit. You're not fundamentally changing it. And so I'm curious your take on that. Is gene editing in any way less of a concerning thing than full-scale genetic engineering? And secondly, are there any crops right now in commercial cultivation that have had edited genes?
I understand that the Arctic apple may be gene edited. I just read that. I wasn't actually sure. I need to double check that, which is an important point. No, gene editing doesn't get a pass. In some cases and in some ways, it's more dangerous than transferring genes between species, and in some ways it's not. So it's a mix. When you take a gene from one species and you put it into another species, you don't know how those genes are going to interact. But what's interesting is oftentimes when you're talking about plant gene editing, you will actually transfer genes, often bacterial genes, into the cell structure to get that gene editing mechanism in there. And so the process of biolistics or using a gene gun or agrobacterium or bacterial infection can still occur with gene editing. And the process of tissue culture or cloning still occurs in creating the crop, which can create in itself hundreds or thousands of mutations. But what happens is with plant gene editing, you stick in a mechanism that produces, let's say it produces a facial recognition program that goes up and down the DNA looking for a match, and then it has an assassin, or let's call it a scissors, which cuts and can even destroy a gene. Now, what's interesting about gene editing that's different than normal genetic engineering is if you create a gene edited plant, that mechanism is still in there working. So a year later, if you decide, okay, that's the cell culture you're going to take, it's very different than it was when you first genetically engineered it, because it may have continued cuts happening throughout the year. Also, the way that gene editing works is it cuts the DNA, and then the DNA reforms out of your control. And when it reforms, it can grab genetic material from the petri dish. So hornless cattle that were supposed to be completely safe ended up with bacterial genes that produced antibiotic resistant proteins, which could create super diseases. Mice ended up with retroviruses inserted into their DNA. This makes gene editing particularly dangerous. What's even more dangerous, though, is the fact that the gene editors don't even know how dangerous it is, because they go along with assumptions. They say, according to my manual, according to my book, according to my computer program, which evaluates the risks, my gene edit should work.
Yeah.
They stop there. They don't actually do a genome sequencing, but the very few genome sequencings that are done and published show that the computer projections are completely wrong, and they're dealing with dynamite.
Yeah. So, Jeffrey, we hear often from proponents of genetic engineering that there's never been a known case of bad outcomes, let's say, from genetically engineered things. Now, we could also counter and say, well, we're all guinea pigs without anyone monitoring the lab experiment, because virtually all of us have consumed some GMOs. So how exactly would you know if there was a negative outcome when you unleash something on a population of by the hundreds of millions, and then say, oh my gosh, no problem. Never mind that food allergy rates have, quadrupled in the last generation since GMOs came into widespread use. Never mind that our microbiomes are being decimated by who knows what, lots of factors, right? But maybe, just maybe, widespread use of glyphosate, which is an antibiotic, could play a part in that, right? Never mind that rates of diabetes and obesity have been skyrocketing during these same years. But just functionally, they say, we don't know, right? There's lots of other factors we could attribute those things to, right? However, you might point out that there have been some known impacts from GMOs, even apart from the glyphosate. Now, I want to recognize that a lot of GMO crops are RoundUp Ready. Yes. They're specifically made to be receptacles for glyphosate and not be harmed. It's a weed killer, but it's also quite dangerous. However, apart from that, Jeffrey, you are asserting, I think, that there are some known dangers with GMOs, even if they aren't the RoundUp Ready type. Can you tell us more?
Well, let's go historically. I was on the George Norrie Coast to Coast radio show last night, and someone called up who was a scientist, thanking me for my work and then telling me what could have been an absolute devastating story. Back in the 80s, he took some L-tryptophan supplement and woke up in the middle of the night. He said he felt like his body was being tortured. He gave some to his brother, and the same thing happened to the brother. And then he found out later about the L-tryptophan catastrophe. This particular L-tryptophan was being produced by genetically engineered bacteria in Japan by a company called Showa. And they were not aware that the process of genetic engineering was almost certainly the cause of these tiny contaminants that ended up killing about 100 Americans and causing 5,000 to 10,000 to fall sick. Some became permanently disabled. Now, the FDA covered up the genetically engineered roots when they spoke to Congress to report on the epidemic. They ignored the fact that it was only the GMOs. the versions that created the problem. They took all L-tryptophan off the market, blaming it generically on a amino acid which had been safe for years in the past and years to come. And it was very much hush-hush. They never did an investigation to verify. But that is an example of a genetically engineered product which did in fact kill people in the 1980s. Now, more recently, we have the genetically engineered crops, but before that was introduced, Dr. Arpad Pusztai, the leading researcher in the world in his field, was given $3 million by the UK government to figure out how to test for the safety of GMOs. And he explained very clearly that the process of genetic engineering, it turns out, and it wasn't what he was expecting, is inherently unsafe. And within 10 days, the process of genetic engineering, irrespective of what gene you put in, caused potentially precancerous cell growth in the digestive tract, smaller brains, livers, and testicles, partial atrophy of the liver, damaged immune system in his rats. This was not Roundup Ready. And it was not the, it wasn't the particular gene that caused the problem. It was the generic process.
Yes.
Now, I remember publishing a picture of the potentially precancerous cell growth in the intestines and in the stomach in my book, Genetic Roulette, which was being read later by Dr. Michelle Perro, a pediatrician. She looked at the pictures and an aha went off in her mind and said, oh my God, this is what's happening to the kids in the United States. She had been a pediatrician for years, and then starting around 2000, she started noticing that very complex diseases were happening. The kids were not responding to the same treatments. And she realized that the leaky gut and the changes that were happening as in the lab animals were happening in the humans. She started putting her patients on organic diets, and finally they got better. Now, if that was the only data point that we had, it would be very weak. We have asked audiences at 150 lectures, what did you notice when you got rid of GMOs? And they basically defined a whole list of symptoms that were consistent over 150 lectures, including about 24 medical talks where the audience was talking about thousands and thousands of their patients. So then we surveyed 3,256 people, subscribers to the Institute for Responsible Technology, and they reported the same symptoms getting better with digestion at the top and brain fog and fatigue and weight problems and anxiety and depression, the exact same relative frequencies that we saw in these lectures. And so I published a peer-reviewed article, not only about the research, but also showing how GMOs create, how the modes of action from the genetic engineering process itself to the Roundup, to the Bt toxin insecticide that's produced in corn and cotton and in South American soybeans, how their modes of action could predict these problems. We published the epidemiological charts showing high correlation between the rise of GMOs and Roundup and these diseases. And it turns out there's similar anecdotal evidence among pets and livestock. The veterinarians that treat both, again, same thing as Michelle Perro saw in children. Barbara Royal, Oprah Winfrey's veterinarian, saw it in cats and dogs. Others, large animal veterinarians, saw it in pigs and cows. So we actually have anecdotal evidence, animal feeding studies showing that these same set of diseases, the precursors of them, are created in the lab. And we have so many people and physicians saying, it is absolutely clear and unmistakable when people take the GMOs out of their diet, they get better.
So that's quite a powerful statement. And I just want to be clear, when you say take the GMOs out of your diet, are you also referring to going organic generally?
That's a great question.
Or is that a distinction there? Are people getting those results when they go non-GMO but still eat, for example, non-organic wheat, which might be sprayed with glyphosate, etc.?
I love your question. We're getting both. So when I talk to a pig farmer or a cow farmer, they may take their animals off of GMO soy or GMO corn or both and notice a dramatic improvement in the health. I talked to one farmer who he was blaming new genetics of pigs that have moved into the area, probably from Canada, the fact that he went from having the easiest job on the farm because he was in charge of the nursery of 300 piglets or 3,000 piglets, to having the hardest time on the farm because all the piglets were getting sick and he had to inject them with medicines all the time. And a friend of his said, why don't you go non-GMO? And he went non-GMO, and he was shocked because the pigs started acting like they did 14 years before. During that 14 years when they were feeding GMO soy, they were sickly, they were lying down all the time, they didn't have the energy of piglets. When he switched them to non-GMO soy, they act like piglets again. And this happened, and he called his friend that had made the recommendation in 11 days. He was stuttering, and he was hardly coherent because evidence was right there. We saw that with other pigs and cows and chickens and all around the world, just from going from GMO to non-GMO. But when humans switch, they still may end up with glyphosate or Roundup sprayed all over the wheats, the oat, etc. And so when we did the survey of 3,256 people, we asked them, what other things did you do when you switched to non-GMO? And a large percentage switched to organic at the same time. We don't recommend doing the experiment in pieces. We recommend going fully organic, because that's where you're going to have the biggest impact, because it's the Roundup that's part of the problem, and Roundup is in a lot of non-GMO foods, particularly the grains and the beans.
And just to be clear, in case folks aren't aware of this, it's used as a desiccant to dry out crops before harvest. Sometimes farmers are able to get an extra crop cycle in, or it just makes the harvest process easier when glyphosate is used. And that's all very lovely. I want to make things easier for our farmers, but not at the expense of our health and our well-being. So what's happened is that right before harvest, mostly wheat, but also some oats, some legumes, various cereal crops are now being sprayed with glyphosate or Roundup, whose primary active ingredient is glyphosate. And because it's right before a harvest, researchers are estimating that potentially up to half of the actual exposure to glyphosate in the American diet is coming from these crops, because there's so much absorbed by the plant and on the plant right at that particular vulnerable moment. And so this is a heightened reason to go organic, particularly with the cereal crops, if you possibly can.
And beans, because it turns out if you just have hummus that's not organic, that has enormous, or has been tested as an enormous amount of glyphosate residues. Same with lentils, mung beans, peas, because it's sprayed on the beans and the grains, but it's also sprayed in orange orchards and in vineyards, so it's in orange juice and wine. So it's pretty pervasive. We have a report of everyone's testing of glyphosate at the Institute for Responsible Technology. So it's many, many pages, and you can sort it to see what you need to avoid if you can't buy organic.
Yeah. For years, I've been telling folks that if they want to avoid GMOs, the main crops to look out for are corn, soy, canola, cotton, which is used in making cottonseed oil, and sugar beets, which about half our sugar supply is made from genetically engineered sugar beets. The other half is generally from cane sugar. But now it's not quite so simple, because as you're saying, there's a lot of other crops that are not genetically engineered, but that are sprayed with Roundup, which is a big deal. And we also have some other crops coming on now. They're maybe not high volume yet, but there's the Arctic apple, there's certain potato varieties that are genetically engineered as well. So what can you tell us about the newer developments? I guess there's also some zucchini squash. What are some of the newer developments that are maybe way more widespread than most people realize in terms of their exposure?
I was talking to Professor Emeritus Don Huber from Purdue University some years ago, and he said the new GMOs that are coming, they're going to be a lot worse than the RoundUp Ready varieties. And he was talking about something called RNA interference. And this is what's used in the potato and in the apple. What they do is they have DNA that produces a little strand of RNA, and let's just animate this RNA. It goes around and it looks for pieces of the DNA that look like itself, and then it gloms on and it silences it. So it silences aspects or genes within the DNA, and what it's designed to do is to silence the genes that turn the apple or potato brown when it is sliced. Now, what's interesting is, and this is well known, that RNA, these little double-stranded RNA pieces, can interact between species. So if you feed honeybees double-stranded RNA, as they did in one study for one single meal, it altered the expression of 1,400 genes, 10% of the genome in the honeybees. If you feed it to mice, it can change their gene expression. If you feed double-stranded RNA to humans, it can change our expression. So scientists at the EPA, scientists at the USDA, who were actually bullied, they expressed concern about using this double-stranded RNA because if we eat the apple, now the double-stranded RNA can survive digestion, can get into the bloodstream. What if it meets with our DNA and silences something? Is it silencing something that's important? Is it silencing a regulatory gene that influences many other genes?
Yeah.
So we say never, ever, ever eat the pre-sliced apples that are being sold on Amazon. Never eat the innate potato. Try and get organic potatoes as much as possible because you may end up reprogramming your own gene expression. Now, the potatoes have some additional problems. The person that made the potato, he originally worked at Monsanto and then moved over to J.R. Simplot, the #1 potato maker in the United States, probably in the world, and created these innate potatoes for them. After he retired, he started looking at the literature and then published a book, which was called Pandora's Potato, the Worst GMO, and describes in page after page after page all the reasons why this particular potato that he created might get you sick. And one example is that normally potatoes get bruised and then they turn brown, and around those brown spots are toxins, and those have to be cut away or the potato is discarded. These are like Botox potatoes. They lie about their age. They don't show their bruises, and it can end up with these same toxins in your stomach, and no one will know along the entire processing chain because the visual cue, which for centuries has told people, don't eat that potato, is being engineered out of the food supply. So you may be eating the toxin as well as reprogramming your own gene expression. Now, Monsanto and others, Bayer, want to create RNA interference sprays. So you can spray on a crop. It'll change the gene expression of insects, for example. And what if it gets on the applicator? What if we eat that RNA interference chemical? It might change our gene expression. And this is something that they have no answer to. They're just trying to push it through, pretending that it's safe.
Yes, wow. So unless you're secretly living with a terror that you will turn brown in the middle of the night if you're exposed to air, then you know, it may not be for you. I think that the danger of this is quite considerable because as you point out, the only thing that lives longer than genetic change is extinction. And because we're looking at things that you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And it may be, let's suppose, that most or all of these things turn out to be safer than we thought. But let's suppose that one genetically engineered food or chemical or RNA, what's your term again? Your RNA interference, right? Okay, excuse me. One RNA interference compound gets out and changes the gene pool forever, not just in potatoes or corn or soy, but in humans or in bacteria. Let's
pick it up from the bacteria, because you have just landed on something. Bacteria can be far worse than genetically engineered corn or a pig, because there was an experiment done by the EPA, reported by a whistleblower to Dr. Elaine Ingham. And she said that the EPA disavows this research. They pretend it was never done, but she spoke to EPA members who not only swore it was done, but they actually gave her the results. They released genetically engineered bacteria in one location and monitored its movement and found that it had traveled 11 miles in the first growing season. And then it continued to travel and continued to travel. And within a few years, it was found everywhere on the planet. Now, why is this relevant? Because Elaine Ingham was also involved in another almost released genetically engineered bacteria, which may have also gone around the world. And it was engineered to turn plant matter into alcohol. Well-meaning scientists thought, let's send these bacteria to farmers. They can mix it with the stubble from their crop fields instead of having to burn those fields. That will turn that stubble into alcohol. They could run their tractors and then take that nutrient-rich sludge at the bottom of the barrel, spread it on the field as a fertilizer.
Yes.
It passed all of the tests that the EPA required. It was about to be released for that same type of experiment that the EPA did to see how far it would spread. 2 weeks before it was to be released, Elaine Ingham's graduate student, she was the advisor, he was doing research for his PhD, wanted to get something done on GMOs, so he got permission to use the GMO experiment that was being done. He took that nutrient-rich sludge, he mixed it with soil, he planted wheat seeds. He showed up one Saturday morning at the lab, and he found that the genetically engineered sludge had turned the wheat seedlings into mush. It had turned the plants into alcohol, killing them. Now, I asked Dr. Elaine Ingham, what would be a worst case scenario that's plausible, that's realistic, if they had released this bacteria? And she said, this particular bacteria, Klebsiella planticola, is found on every plant that has been evaluated, on the root systems, etc.
Yeah.
If the genetically engineered variety were out competing, because it would turn stuff into alcohol and it would survive, but the normal natural planticola would not, she said it could end terrestrial plant life. End terrestrial plant life. That's not a catastrophe, that's a cataclysm. Now, this was in the early 90s, but it wasn't the first bacteria that was almost released. In the late 80s, there was a genetically engineered bacteria that was designed to protect frost damage by taking normal bacteria, which facilitates the creation of frost, and instead putting an impotent variety in that could, again, outcompete, and so it wouldn't create the frost. And they created this, but they didn't release it widely. If they had, it may have altered weather patterns, because now we know that that bacteria is airborne and it creates clouds and rain from moisture, and it creates snow and frost, and it could have altered the weather patterns and allowed weeds to survive through the winter, and could have created a catastrophe or a cataclysm. Now, you look at gene editing, it is so cheap. You can genetically engineer bacteria in do-it-yourself kits that you can buy on Amazon today for $160. That price is going to go down. The impact or the ability of that do-it-yourself kit is going to go up. The biohacking labs you can purchase now for $2,000 will increase in their capacity.
Yeah.
We have major transnationals with facilities packed with robots driven by artificial intelligence for massive release. What happens if we release 100,000 or 500,000 or 1 million organisms in this generation? That is a formula for a disaster, because if there is a capacity for a terrestrial plant life being knocked out, or the weather patterns or anything like that, what we're doing is we're changing the structure of nature, corrupting the gene pool irreversibly. All future generations will be inheriting not the products of the billions of years of evolution, but the products of laboratory creations whose number one most common result is surprise side effects.
Right. So this is obviously chilling to contemplate. And I want to say, and you and I may have a slightly different take on this, maybe not, but for myself, I am not ideologically opposed to genetic engineering in theory. In other words, if it could be done safely and was in the right hands, and if we knew what we were doing, and if we could somehow know that we were testing properly, I'm of the belief that it's a technology that could conceivably have benefit for humankind and for our planet. However, the profit motive distorts this horrendously. And what we have done is we've given the power to create life in perpetuity and to create new life forms and to alter life at its fundamental core into the hands of companies who are out to make money. That's what's in their DNA. And they do not have a conscience built into their DNA. There's no conscience built into the stock market. And so just follow me for a second here. If theoretically Bayer, once previously Monsanto, could undertake a deal where there's a 9 in 10 chance that they'll make $100 billion on something, and a 1 in 10 chance that they will annihilate all life on Earth. From a business standpoint, all conscience aside, that would be a smart move, because 9 out of 10 chance they're going to make a killing, right? And what strikes me is that this is too powerful to leave in the hands of companies who just say, trust us, because quite frankly, the stakes are too high. And we've seen evidence that that trust has been ill-placed already. Lots and lots of it. So, Jeffrey, I want to ask you about one more piece here, and then we've got a lot of questions from our food revolution.
Do you want me to respond to the ideological?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Because the thing is, it's like you said, we may not be the same, but then you gave me your side. I got to get it.
What is your take here? Yeah, sure. Please.
I agree.
Okay.
I have said that genetic engineering in certain capacities may be very helpful, specifically, for example, correcting a defect in humans in a non-inheritable way. It might be useful to create certain products in a laboratory.
Yeah.
Where we draw our line is 2 areas. One, absolutely no outdoor release of viable GMOs that could contaminate the gene pool. And 2, no products of genetic engineering into the food supply, which exposes it to the entire population.
Yeah.
So that's where we focus. Now, because at the Institute for Responsible Technology, we pioneered the messaging about the health dangers, which has driven this tipping point that's underway. 46% of Americans are seeking non-GMO food, and the food companies are scrambling to get rid of it. It's working like we predicted and like we engineered. Now, what's interesting is human choice in the supermarket is not going to stop the introduction of genetically engineered bacteria, which is happening this year by companies that are doing soil remediation, genetically engineered bacteria, which could end up in our gut, which could change who knows what. We need to institute a global awareness of what could go wrong so that everyone realizes we have come to this inevitable time in human history where we can redirect the streams of evolution for all time, and we don't have the moral or ethical compass or even a deep understanding of the implications of the practice. So we need to lock it in the lab and keep it out of the food supply, and that requires policy. So for the first time in my 25 years doing this, I'm like now completely rewriting our activism, and we're raising money to create a global movement through the Institute for Responsible Technology to bring in the climate change people for planetary survival, the animal rights people, the health people, these religious people, so that everyone realizes we now have to focus as a civilization to stop this, or all future generations are going to be suffering from our folly.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So let's turn now to glyphosate, the primary active ingredient in Roundup. And I'll ask you to be kind of brief here, just because we have a lot of questions we haven't gotten to yet from our food revolutionaries.
I can do that.
Okay, all right. So high level, glyphosate is being used widely. It's being used most of all on Roundup Ready crops, but it's also being used as a desiccant. Why should that concern us?
It's as if this molecule was designed to damage or destroy the foundations of our health. It eliminates the ability to access certain minerals which can run our bodies. It is an antibiotic, and we know that it changes the gut bacteria in ways that can lead to many diseases. It can cause leaky gut, which is linked to inflammation and many diseases and autoimmune disease. It can damage the DNA and is linked to cancer. It's named as a class 2A carcinogen. It can possibly reduce the availability of the neurotransmitters serotonin, melatonin, and dopamine, causing anxiety, sleeplessness, pain, etc. It can damage the mitochondria, which is the foundation of lifespan, prevention of cancer, and so many other diseases. It can prevent the production of certain digestive enzymes and damage the linings of the intestines. And I'm only getting started. It's also linked to birth defects, and when injected into pregnant mice, there was an epigenetic inherited effect, so that the offspring were fine, the grandchildren were really messed up, but the generation that got the worst hit was the great-grandchildren, where 90% of that generation of these mice ended up with serious diseases, deaths during giving birth, prostate problems, kidney problems, obesity. So it is really a dangerous molecule.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Okay, and we already covered kind of how to avoid it, which is basically going organic.
Right.
You
And
can
if
go
you want to
certified
look at,
non-GMO, and that helps. I suppose it's not being used that we know of on a lot of fruits and vegetables right now, other than maybe zucchini with the genetically engineered variety. Is that true?
no, the zucchini is not Roundup Ready. It's viral
Okay.
resistant. It's, because it's used in vineyards for the lines of the vineyards, it'll end up in grapes.
Okay.
It is, however, in certain parts of the country in the rain. So there's tiny amounts of glyphosate residues in things that you wouldn't think of. So
Right.
we just have to say, yeah, we're not going to get rid of it 100%. And to stop it being sprayed in your area, a lot of citizens are having a lot of success getting it stopped. And if you go to rounduprisks.com, we have a training program for people to help them make that happen in their area.
Okay, rounduprisks.com. Thank you.
Sure.
Now let's go to some questions from our food revolutionaries. Barbara said, I see a couple of different things on labels indicating non-GMO. Is one better than another? Is it just that one is certified?
Yes, I go with the non-GMO project verification, which is that butterfly. Some companies will do self-certification. So Cheerios, for example, they declare non-GMO on the side of their normal traditional Cheerios, not the honey nut Cheerios. I called them up and said, what do you consider non-GMO? They said, that's proprietary. I said, is it just that you tell your farmers not to use it? Do you actually do tests? Do you do simple strip tests, or do you do the PCR in the laboratory? And do you have a rejection threshold? Or do you allow things that come in that are made from GMOs but simply don't have the DNA? They would not answer the question. Same thing with Trader Joe's. They say we're non-GMO with anything that our name on it, but they don't tell us how. The non-GMO project has published standards that we think are very strong, so we think that's the way to go.
Yes. Okay, thank you. We heard from Marie, who said, I hope I'm choosing all non-GMO when I buy organic. Label for organic usually starts with a 9. Produce with a label starting 3 or 4, are these considered GMO? What is the difference between the food labels starting 3 or 4? How can we know a produce is GMO? Or are there certain produce/foods to avoid altogether because they're GMOs?
Great question. So there's an inventory control method used at produce places where the 9, a 5-digit code beginning with a 9, means that it's organic. They actually created a system that's saying that if anyone wanted to tell people that it was GMO, they would have a 5-digit that started with 8. You can ignore that. No one uses it. It was never designed for consumers. It's completely a theoretical thing that's still circulating on the internet. Ignore it. So organic does not allow the intentional use of GMOs. Now, it's possible that there's contamination. Organic does not require testing for levels of contamination. So it's possible, depending on what it is, that there's small levels of GMOs. The non-GMO project does require testing if you're using anything that might be a GMO. So you might see organic and non-GMO project verified on the same package. That I would say would be the gold standard because it avoids the Roundup because it's organic. It's not supposed to use GMO because it's organic. And there's been testing to verify that the system is keeping the level either low or non-existent. Now, when you go to the produce section, there's not a lot of GMOs down there. So there's basically, these are the GMOs on the marketplace right now: soy, corn, cotton, canola, sugar beets, alfalfa, yellow squash, zucchini, papaya from Hawaii or China, apples, and potatoes. And there's also salmon that's been sold in Canada, not yet in the United States. Now, that's not a lot of the produce section. So anything that I didn't mention is not genetically engineered at this time. Not seedless watermelons, not pluots. Those are not genetically engineered in the lab in the ways that we're talking about. Now, if you're going to buy a zucchini, make sure it's organic. If you're going to buy yellow squash, make sure it's organic. So if you really want to avoid, not every zucchini that's not organic is GMO, but it's like, Clint Eastwood, feeling lucky. So you have to decide whether you're willing to take that risk.
Thank you. Couple questions really going a little deeper on this same theme. Jane said, is there an available list of all the foods that are genetically engineered? And Mark said, I buy a lot of raw food items at my bulk food store. However, there are not a lot of organically produced items there, so I have no idea what's GMO. Is there a set of grains or other bulk foods that I should assume is GMO or non-GMO?
Well, we kind of answered the question, but we did it very quickly by naming them. You really want to have them written down, because if you're listening to this and you're on the run, you're not writing them down. You can go to non-GMOshoppingguide.com, which is a free service from the Institute for Responsible Technology. We list all the products that have been verified by the Non-GMO Project. We list which products are genetically engineered. That list has been stable for a while, but I did not mention this, that animal products from animals that are not raised organic or 100% grass-fed are usually animals that have been fed genetically engineered soy, corn, cottonseed meal, canola meal, sugar beet pulp, or alfalfa. And some of the dairy products in the United States are from cows that have been injected with genetically engineered bovine growth hormone, which I was talking to a former Monsanto scientist. He said 3 of his colleagues at Monsanto found so much cancer-promoting hormone in the milk from treated cows. The 3 Monsanto scientists refused to drink milk thereafter unless it was organic. One bought his own cow. Now, there are genetically engineered cooking agents and flavorings, et cetera, One example that we want to avoid at all costs, in my opinion, is the Impossible Burger, because that's genetically engineered yeast to produce something called heme. It ends up producing 46 additional proteins, none of which have been characterized as healthy in the food supply. And it also uses RoundUp Ready soy that had been sprayed with Roundup, a nonprofit group gathering testimonials of people that got sick after eating the Impossible Burger. Don't become a casualty. Friends don't let friends eat the Impossible Burger.
Yeah, if you want to be healthy, then make it impossible.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Jeffrey. Let's see. We heard from Alden, who asked, are seedless grapes GMO?
No, fortunately not. What happens is the seedless grapes, the seedless watermelons, they come from crossbreeding. They're not the genetic engineering things where you take a gun and you shoot millions of genes into a plate of millions of cells and clone the cells into a plant. You can crossbreed and get things like pluots and seedless grapes. So you can relax about those. And if you get a chance, try heirloom varieties, because we now have a loss of biodiversity that's so great because there's been a pushing of certain few varieties that can ship well or be picked mechanically, that some of the diversity and some of that richness and flavor and health benefits of the variety of what nature's been given us for thousands of years is being lost. So not only for your own health, but also to support the supply system to grow that diversity and richness, look for heirloom varieties as well.
All righty. Thank you so much for that. Let's see, I'm seeing lots of other questions here. So Janet said, we eat organic and beyond organic foods are the foods that will support our health while being bombarded with EMF, cell towers, our devices, iPhones, iPads, TV, etc. Janet, I could refer you to an article we actually wrote on this topic. If you Google foodrevolution.org space detoxifying or detox, you'll find it. It's an article about 12 detoxifying foods that have actually shown to help your body detoxify and clear away toxins from your environment. And those basically, the quick punchline is it's cruciferous vegetables and leafy greens, it's lemons, it's avocados, it's green tea, apples, garlic, chlorella, turmeric, beets, blueberries, cilantro, and ginger. Lots more in the article about why those specific foods work, how they work, what they do, what the studies actually show, what kinds of things they help your body clear away. But that's the fast list. And obviously, organic is helpful. So I mentioned apples, for example, on that list. Well, it doesn't do you a whole lot of good if you're trying to detoxify with apples, but you're eating apples that were sprayed with pesticides and were genetically engineered. So do your best to, the best way to detoxify is to not bring the toxins in the first place. But some of us are going to get some anyway, and we want to optimize our body's ability to clear away the junk so we can be optimally healthy and do our job well to get rid of the bad stuff when we're exposed to it.
In fact, there's 2 major ways that the body detoxes. Well, there's several, but the liver and the cells themselves. In both of those cases, glyphosate helps prevent those type of detoxification. It prevents the ability for these CYP enzymes to work in the liver, and it also reduces the NRF2, which is the way that the cells will detox. And so by taking glyphosate in, all the other toxins become more elevated if they were normally released during these pathways. So being organic is critical, especially to avoid the Roundup, so that the detoxification pathways will get rid of these chemicals that are in your system now.
Thanks, Jeffrey. Heather asked, what happens when GMO food, Roundup, and other pesticides, heavy metals, and environmental toxins are joined by EMFs, especially the coming 5G, and all impact us at once? What is the effect on both us and our microbiome? And so obviously we've been talking about some of these toxins. So I guess she's really talking about what happens when the cumulative takes place, and also do you see 5G as being significant in this?
So I interviewed 18 experts for Healing from GMOs and Roundup online conference. And Dietrich Klinghardt and Lee Cowden, both doctors who are very well known among functional medicine and integrative medicine, both talked about the fact that glyphosate damages the gut bacteria, and so does the EMF fields, like whether it be 5G or your Wi-Fi, et cetera. And they said the two work together. And so they recommended, as part of their protocol for healing from the impact of GMOs and Roundup, was to not only switch to organic, but also to limit exposure to these fields. Now, there may be other ways that they work together, but I don't have, and there probably are other ways that it works together, especially with the heavy metals and all that. Now, heavy metals, it's interesting. There was a serious outbreak of kidney disease in Sri Lanka and in Central America, where a huge percentage of farm workers ended up on dialysis or dying. And there was a study done where they postulated that the glyphosate would bind with arsenic that was found in the area, because they were spraying with glyphosate. There was arsenic in the area, and that it would bind together because it's a chelator, it holds onto it, which would smuggle it into the system, then into the kidneys. And in the kidney environment, it would cause the two to separate, and the arsenic and the glyphosate would damage or kill the kidney. And so that's a way that glyphosate works with heavy metals, in this case arsenic, to make it much worse.
Yes, thank you. These things really do compound. You can't just look at any one thing in isolation.
Right.
But the key thing is, we're never going to be able to get rid of every toxin that's ever been invented on this planet, but we do the best we can, right?
Exactly.
To minimize the load and to optimize the health and to help our bodies respond effectively to the stuff that we can't control. You know, there's what's called the serenity prayer. Help me to release, or to accept the things I cannot change, give me the courage to change the things I can, and give me the wisdom to know the difference.
Absolutely.
Interestingly, it's not just about serenity. You could also call it the courage prayer or the wisdom prayer, I suppose, because we're talking about all three of those things. And in this case, there is a certain amount of serenity. I don't want to live in fear of things I can't control or can't do anything about. I don't think that helps anybody. Fear is actually bad for your health. But effective response, manifesting courage in response to the violations that we see, is an act of self-love and dignity. So let's have wisdom too. You know what, if you're not in a financial position to afford to go 100% organic right now, number one, focus on cutting out food waste, eat out at restaurants less, prepare in bulk, focus on the basic staples, eat more of the organic foods that are affordable, like legumes do not cost an arm and a leg, you know, even organic, right? The quinoa even, you know, cabbage, carrots, mushrooms, some of these things can be pretty darn affordable, and they're so nutrient packed. You know, and of course, go organic as much as you can, you know. But as we've mentioned, not everything is on the same playing field there. So if you're not going to go organic with something, make sure it's not one of the crops that's genetically engineered widely. And that's going to be a helpful way to protect yourself and your family. We had a question come in from Ruth. This will be the last one from our participants here. She said, should we wash organic produce? What about non-GMO foods that are not labeled organic? How safe are they? I think we've addressed the second part. As far as washing, first let's clarify, is it helpful to wash GMO crops?
Well, the question was, should we wash organic food? And
yeah.
I'm gonna start
and I'll get to that too. Sure.
I'll start there because it's really interesting. I was talking to Dietrich Klinghardt in the interview, and he was talking about how sometimes the microbiome on the crops may be, in some cases, healthier than the nutrients in the crops themselves. He talked about how certain herbs may be efficacious because of the specific microbiome that's attracted to those herbal plants. He talked about green leafy vegetables where we may be able to only process and assimilate 5% of the nutrients, but they're still very, very healthy. Maybe the microbiome on those green leafy, or the lettuces, etc. So he said that he does not wash the organic produce. And since he's said that, I found out that several of my friends also do not wash the organic produce. It kind of depends where it's coming from and whether there's viruses out there. But anyway, that's one thing. So I'll let people make that decision, but it's an interesting concept. Now, for non-organic things, yeah, I think washing is important, but it's not going to take glyphosate out of the inside. Because glyphosate, what happens is they combine it with a surfactant, which is extremely dangerous. It drives the glyphosate poison into the crop. It gets deposited into the food portion. 15% goes out through the roots, but the rest hangs out in the crop itself. And when you take that food, you can't wash it off. But there are basic chemicals that are on the surface of the chemical-laden industry. So washing it is not a bad idea, but you can't guarantee that you're going to get rid of all the chemicals.
Yeah, absolutely. And we did run an article on this. If you Google Food Revolution Wash, you'll pull up the article. Again, that's Food Revolution Wash, about how to wash vegetables and fruits to remove pesticides. So if you're eating crops that are not genetically engineered necessarily, but fruits and vegetables that may have been sprayed with pesticides, it turns out if you use baking soda and mix about a tablespoon into a gallon of water, you create a solution that has been proven to remove far more of the pesticides than just water would. You soak it for about 15 minutes, and that can do a lot of good. Again, it's all about what you can afford. Obviously, if you can go organic, you avoid a lot of the pesticides in the first place. Not all of them. There are some insecticides used even in organic agriculture, not glyphosate, but some others that are not particularly great. And this comes back to really the question of what is your source. I would never wash vegetables from our organic garden, for example, because I actually think that some of the little bits of bacteria that are on there are actually good for me. But if I'm getting it from the store, different story. Unless you know who grew it, farmer's market, arguable. Depends how big is the operation, how are they running things, Are they using manure from factory farms, for example, right? Because if they're doing that, then there could be some pathogenic bacteria on your lovely organic kale leaf, and you might not want to eat that. But if it's a natural system that's regenerative, then that's another story. And good bacteria is good for us. So it all depends on source and your values. And obviously, if you have any particular vulnerabilities, then maybe it becomes more important. So Jeffrey, I think we've covered a lot here. Anything more you want to say to our participants as we move towards completion?
Well, I think that the concept that we have arrived at this inevitable time in human history where we have the capacity to replace nature in this generation with gene-edited alternatives gives a moment of pause, but it gives a sense now that we can actually protect all living beings and all future generations in this generation. We could take steps that we can actually bless by protecting all of nature and all future human offspring. And that's not something that our ancestors had as an opportunity because there was never a threat that could actually cause such widespread damage through time and space. So we can, if just as before, we were looking at whether you can afford organic. I loved your answer. It sounded like me, talking about not worrying and not being upset that you can't follow everything. I also want to say that when you hear about the possibility of replacing nature, and if you go to protectnaturenow.com, we have a 3-minute video which describes this threat, and I'm going to create a new one about that bacteria, which we just talked about that I'm working on today. It's an opportunity for us to do something great for the future, for all living beings, for all future generations. And it's an opportunity rather than a burden if we choose it to be that way. We can choose whether we're a victim or a victor. We can decide what we consider food and what we consider food-shaped objects. It's our opportunity to take charge. And what's interesting is, I was speaking in Hawaii at the end of 2019, and a Hawaiian elder explained to me what aloha aina is. It's this reciprocity of love of the land. We love nature, and there's a reciprocal love, a reciprocal support. And this I can relate from my own experience, and maybe you can too. When we step up as voices speaking on behalf of nature, protecting nature, it's as if there's wind below our sails, and it's an advanced technique that I can not speak more highly about of propelling us as if we are getting supported by nature. So rather than taking this as a burden and taking this as a fear, take this as an opportunity and an invitation to participate. Perhaps you can provide financial support. Perhaps you can get involved as an activist. Perhaps you become what I call a click and send revolutionary by getting the information and posting it. In any case, what we're doing together is laying the foundation to protect nature now.
Yes, absolutely. And you really do vote with every dollar you spend and every bite you take for the future of food and how it's growing. And the truth is that as food companies recognize that there's money to be made in non-GMO foods and crops, they start prioritizing. We've already got a two-tiered system where farmers that are non-GMO with certain crops can make more money for their harvest than GMO crops can. And obviously organic makes even more money. And so it seems to me that we have an incredible opportunity to create a marketplace demand for certified non-GMO, and in that process to shift the course of history to help protect life. We obviously protect ourselves, but I want everyone watching to remember this isn't just about you. This is about how food is growing and the future of food on this planet. So Jeffrey, I thank you so much for your decades of courageous leadership in this field, for your dedication as always to not just personal health, but mobilizing movements, and for your wisdom, for your leadership, for your heartful curiosity, and your dedication to collective well-being. Future generations, I believe, will thank you for it.
Thank you, Ocean. I deeply appreciate who you are, what you do, and the heart that you give to your work in the world.
Thank you. This is Ocean Robbins and Jeffrey Smith signing off and thanking you so much for joining us today. When it comes to cancer, Alzheimer's, diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic illness, what really matters isn't how many books you read, how many webinars you attend, or how much you know. What really matters at the end of the day is what you eat and how you live. The science has given us what we need to know. Now it's time for action. It's time to implement and optimize your healthy lifestyle. It's time to get results. It's time to say goodbye to confusion and hello to clarity. It's time to say goodbye to bad habits and hello to good ones. It's time to fall in love with foods that love you back. It's time to join a community that will support you in achieving your goals. It's time for Whole Life Club. Click the link to find out more and to join in now.